And one day, they were filming this Star Trek episode in the first season, and Spock punches the bad guy and knocks him out. And Leonard Nimoy said, he's a Vulcan, he's logical, he's got to have a better way of doing it. And so what he does is, of course, he does the Vulcan leg pinch right there. And everybody went, ooh! Today we're going to talk about neck because it is important. That was a picture from a book I wrote some years ago. Bob Matsueda, 6th degree black belt. Now I think he's 8th in Kendo. I wanted for the book a picture of him having just hit me in the head. See how much that very hard bamboo cane has bent over my head? Problem. I said, I want that shot. The photographer said, great, hit him. Bam! Nope, didn't get it. Bam! Nope. God almighty. But we eventually ended up, what price we pay. Problem with that. That is can be a head injury. Notice that I'm wearing a full men. That men, I made sure, had a very stiff wing on it. That's the thing that comes over the shoulder. Because I knew he was good enough, he was always going to hit me in the head and not break my collarbone. But I wanted it tight enough that it kept the darn thing off of my head. Which is why the Kendoists don't have a huge concussion protocol. The old men just sat on the head like a helmet. And that's the problem with American football. It just sits on the head like a helmet, and so the whole head and neck gets whacked down. And so that's a major problem. The way that Kendoists got around that is they put this wings on it, and then they tied it down so that the wings can't shoot straight out. And that's a nice way of elevating the helmet off of the head. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the neck here. Warning, chokes of all kinds are very dangerous. When I was a young man, I started in jiu-jitsu. We did a lot of chokes because the instructor was always worried that during a mugging or a sexual assault, being choked out was a very dangerous thing. And so we did a fair amount of it. The problem is it has to be under strict supervision. People may opt out for chokes for various and sundry reasons, physiologic, psychologic, etc. You must respect that. Sometimes it just takes time to get to it. Sometimes you never get to it. Sometimes you really want to. But the question then comes up, okay, if chokes are so dangerous, why the heck are you doing it? Remember that Jigoro Kano, the founder of modern judo, he had to write a textbook in one of the 6 Olympic languages so that he could get judo into the Olympics. This is in the 1920s. So he wrote this wonderful text on judo. If you ever get it, get the first edition. Because in the first edition, which I have a copy, it took me decades to find a copy in English, first edition. It has a final chapter in it that is of dangerous moves that should never be performed. Guess what? In the second edition, he got rid of them because everybody was trying those stupid moves. Well, in a way, that's Jigoro Kano's problem. Why are we teaching chokes if we're saying they're very dangerous? They're very dangerous and you have to learn how to get out of them. So my worry is that chokes are extremely dangerous. They have to be taught, but only insofar as making sure that you can escape them and the techniques that are involved in them. And that makes a huge difference. Looking at the balance of the head, you see Fred here. Remember I talked originally about how there are 6 curves in the spine. One here, one through the body, lumbar region, across the coccyx, across the front of the legs, and across the calves. So it kind of S's up the body. That's how you stand up. So unlike animals, which are just draped down. Well, right now we're going to concentrate on the very top part. And so we'll look at Fred here. And what I'm concerned about the fact is you can see that the head is heavier to the front than to the back. And so there's a tendency when people relax, you see it on the BART train, right? You're sitting on the BART train, you watch the guy across from you drooling down their front because they take their nap. Their head drops down to the front. So there's this pair of muscles here on the body. Now, I keep talking to you about the sternocleidomastoid. Sternocleidomastoid is this one coming from the front. You can see it attaches to the back here and comes to the front like this. So it's pulling here, and that pulls the head back. Why do I keep talking about the sternocleidomastoid? Because that muscle is the primary defender of the carotid artery, which is the primary blood supply. It's not, there's also 2 vertebral arteries. We'll get to that later. But basically, if you have your carotid arteries choked off, you will pass out. And so that you have to learn to defend it. So you have to understand the mechanics. There's also a whole lot of other, here's the trapezius muscle, this muscle that kind of wings out here like this. There's a bunch of muscles here like that. And we'll talk about them as we teach you choke defenses. But those primary ones, keeping it up, and the fact that this, the sternocleidomastoid here, is right in front of the carotid artery. Common neck injuries, whiplash. Suddenly, you're in a car, bam, you hit something, go forward, back. That can hurt the, you can also go side to side, but the more common one, herniated disc. When you look at a spine, there are bones here, but in between the bones is this pulpa, this soft tissue. If you herniate that, that's the basic shock absorber between these bones. And that's when they talk about a herniated disc. It's actually not the bone. It's this material in between. And you don't want to, the jelly-like kind of stuff, but you really don't want to damage it. Spinal cord injury. The spinal cord, of course, runs inside the vertebra here. And so usually it has to do with breaking of the bones here. And then muscle spasms. There, occasionally you'll get something called torticollis, where you just can't quite, and it's really murder if you're a driver. You can't turn your head that way. So suddenly you've got to do this in order to turn. And it will take you a better part of a week for it to heal. But that's a spasming of the muscle. So those are the basic muscles. Why do I talk about this? Well, for example, for whiplash, we teach you backfall. And when we teach you backfall, what do we teach you? Tuck the chin. Why? Because the biggest damage is that snap back. Okay? They teach that, and watch a basketball game. Those guys, all those professional basketball players are all taught to touch their chin and spread themselves out when they take those falls. Stephen Curry is a master at it, which is why he manages to do some of those wild shots that he does. But the bottom line in here, I need you to tuck the chin, whether it's on a side fall, back fall, any kind of fall. That tucking tightens down here, protects the neck, and prevents the whiplash that can occur. Here's a little better. The green is the sternocleidomastoid. Notice it comes in 2 parts. See how here, here it's coming down, it's splitting here and here. And what we have, God, I wish I had a laser pointer. I'll just come up like this. That is your carotid artery. It's hidden down behind the sternocleidomastoid and then kind of pops up and goes into the skull there. And that's the thing you're going to protect. That's why on a choke, we'll always say go in front of the sternocleidomastoid and hook back, and that's how you'll feel where the pulse is. So you go here on yourself, going back. Oh, I'm alive. Oh, great. You can feel the heartbeat there. So there's all these wonderful things that I keep talking about, but there's the sternocleidomastoid. Notice that there's a balance. This is why I always want you to do sit-ups and back arches in equal numbers to keep everything up. Your trapezius muscle coming back here like this. 206 bones in the human body. 206. That's a bit of a lie. When you're born, you have more than that. Why? Skull, amongst other things. Fuse. And so as you get older and older, what's the last bone to fuse in most adults? Yeah, I always feel like it, but no. You're right in the sense of aging, but no, you're not right in the sense of the osteocraft. Anybody know? It used to be your second gill. When you were a fish 400 million years ago, you had a series of gills. Gill number 1 turned into your jaw. Gill number 2 turned into your hyoid. It's up there. I'm giving it away. Yes, the hyoid bone. It is the only bone in the body which is not attached directly to another bone. So it's right there under the jaw. Those of you who can't see, you look at right there. And while it's from a gill, it's used to vocalize. So a howler monkey has this hyoid bone that's 14 times larger than yours. And he's also 14 times noisier than you are. Well, maybe not, but not noisy. And that's how. So what he does is, what you see a howler monkey expand his neck and does all these wonderful things. He's using that hyoid bone. And a horse, the hyoid bone is Y-shaped. And what it allows him to open his throat completely so that when he's galloping, he can breathe laminarly with smooth breathing. You know how when you run and your throat gets raw very quickly? That's because it's no longer laminar. Your throat's not opening correctly and completely. A horse can open its throat completely, and it's using its hyoid bone. How do we know why, when humans started to be able to speak? It's because the hyoid bone transformed itself so that it allowed you to use your tongue to enunciate and use certain syllables. So when you talk about speech, the reason why a dinosaur or a cat or a dog can't speak is that hyoid bone doesn't work that way. It's not shaped correctly for it. So at any rate, it does allow you, it does attach to the tongue, talks to the larynx, palates, etc., and allows you to swallow, breathe, chew, etc., etc. It has different purposes, but in our case, it's very important for language. There's the hyoid bone right there. And just looking at how the structure is, you can see it's attached to a bunch of things. Yes, 400 million years ago, it was the second arch of your gills. Why do I bring this up? Well, I've talked about the carotid artery. I talked about the hyoid bone. And the reason is there's basically two types of chokes. There's people who argue, but physiologically, let's talk about two types of chokes. One is a blood choke. You have two carotid arteries coming up. Those two carotid arteries go up into the brain and attach to a circle. What's that circle called? Any anatomy people in here? It's called the circle of Willis. Call it a reservoir that circles around. Okay? And if it's patent all the way through, then either carotid artery will work. Unfortunately, after the age of about 16, that circle of Willis starts to tighten up and doesn't work so well. So you can be choked off by just having one carotid artery procluded. Bottom line is that it's called a blood choke. And you see how this guy's arm is symmetric to the body that he's choking. So I've got my arm here. You see how my elbow's pointing straight out? I'm not crushing his windpipe, but I am, by virtue of this side and this side of my arm, here and here, squeezing the carotid artery. I'm actually squeezing the sternocleidomastoid in and cutting off the carotid artery. The best defense for that is to drop your chin as much as possible. That allows your sternocleidomastoid to fatten up as much as possible. That will give you an extra few seconds of working time. Bottom line, for a unconsciousness, for a blood choke, is 8 to 10 seconds. That doesn't give you much time to fart around. Your first reaction has to be drop. Then you have to find the elbow and you have to start moving against it. Whether that's an elbow strike, a threat, whatever, you're going to have to do something in a red-hot hurry. It is quite dangerous. If applied too long, of course, it can kill, disrupt the plaque in the arteries. Oh, my goodness. The reason I do not like letting you guys choke me is I am a senior citizen. I have been around too long. And so there will be plaques. As much as my wife has me on a vegetarian diet, God save me, the bottom line is I have plaques inside my arteries, almost for sure. And so if those plaques, if I'm squeezed and those plaques break off, it can stroke. And so especially in older people. So for younger people, it's still, I'm not thrilled with having to do it, but we play with it a little bit. But as you start teaching older people, I don't think that chokes are advisable. Second choke is an air choke. This choke, instead of having my elbow sticking in front, it'll be here. There's also one coming up to the side like that. But the bottom line is I have a flat pushing against the throat, the windpipe. Problem, it's a cartilaginous thing. You can feel the bumps in it there. If you squeeze on that, you can crack it. You can cause it to bleed. You can kill someone that way. Very dangerous. So in here, and by the way, in most police forces in the United States now, they're allowed to do, in some police forces, a blood choke, but they are not allowed to do the air choke. Okay? And the reason is the possibility of damage. There's also people calling for no chokes because there's no distinction between a blood and an air choke. I think there is, but believe me, if somebody's going nuts on you, how are you going to know which one you're going to do? Or worse, you're trying to get a maniac off of grandpa. You come behind and you'll put him in a choke and fall back. Which choke do you got? I have no idea. I was just trying to get the person off of grandpa. So bottom line, there are two types of chokes, blood chokes and air chokes. I do not ever teach air chokes simply because I think it's too dangerous. But if you feel somebody pushing on the windpipe there, that's wrong. Okay? It's an air choke and it's dangerous. And that's why I don't. But the blood chokes, equally, not equally, but also dangerous. And I do worry about them. But in here, when we're teaching you, we will teach you with blood chokes. But you may opt out of it as necessary. Once again, older students, there's plaques inside the arteries. By the way the carotid artery, it comes up, it actually bifurcates. There's an inner and an outer. But at this point here, where we're talking about the sternocleidomastoid, it's protecting where the carotid is still single. Once it passes the pop, it actually splits into an internal and external carotid artery. But those plaques, if they break up and head up into the brain, can cause a stroke. Exercises, I always recommend, just take a little bit of time. Some of them are simple, like just doing a side, even taking your arms like this, stretching, and you'll find what happens is you pull the arms, your shoulders go back. Then you're going to find that a different set of muscles are exercised than if your arms are forward. So there'll be people who will actually teach you, rotate your head with arms forward like this, then put the hands behind, and you'll find that because of that push and pull, remember those first pictures I showed you of the muscles of the neck? Those muscles get rotated. It's just a cylinder. And so as you do this and pull your shoulders back, they open up in a slightly different position, and they will very definitely stretch a different type. So being able to do the back and stretches, front stretches, very important. Idea of just gentle, not yanking, but just never yanking, but a nice steady pull. Let yourself relax into that position. There are people who like to do this one. I like this one myself. Is a lot of times they'll teach you to have your hands down, and here they'll also teach you. You will find that you will choke yourself. How interesting. If you put your head down like this, put your hands up, and then rotate to the top of your head, you can actually feel like you're choking yourself. You're actually doing a wind choke on yourself. You want to feel that whole line. Don't choke yourself out, of course, but doing that full line of choking. You can keep it linear this way, but I always have been told going in different directions, but not putting full weight. Wrestlers will do this, and once you get up to it, yeah, maybe that's fine, especially if you're doing a lot of groundwork and things like that. But I recommend you have two hands on the ground, and you just work your way through, okay? It will take semesters before you kind of feel strong enough in the neck and shoulders. You're going to find odd things, like some of these things, you know, here, pulling the head off the ground. 1, 2, this position allows the head for a different set of muscles. Why? It traps the muscles of the scapula, and it allows you to stretch different sets of muscles. And I believe that is all I have to say on just the anatomy of the neck. Questions? Sir?
In your opinion, doing more zone 4 and 5, threshold cardio is going to scrub some of that plaque on the inside of the blood vessel?
You never want to scrap them. There are enough. For example, they did this huge study, and they discovered that pomegranate juice, 4 ounces a day, is great for getting rid of plaque. Do I believe it? I have no idea, but I've seen a couple of them, and they're kind of going, okay. And pomegranate people loved it. I have my suspicions about who funded that particular study, but nonetheless, you know, eating right, keeping away from, those nasty high lipid diets and things like that, absolutely. Can it be reversed? Yes. If you do have plaques in it, they have shown that by dieting correctly, exercising, getting the fat off of the, especially, some of us are getting a little chunky, getting a little bit of the fat off, getting, as you say, I'd say the exercise is absolutely correct, but insofar as the secondary effects of getting rid of any excess fats and things like that. But diet, don't smoke. So a smoker with a lousy diet, oh God, that's half of the Americans, is a bad idea, especially insofar as plaques are concerned. To answer your question. Sir?
Is there any connection between pressure points in the neck region and chokes, or are they very...
Oh God, I love you, Ashish. The problem that Ashish just threw at me is, one, I love pressure points. I will eventually write that. The book I showed you earlier is The Anatomy of Martial Arts. I've written literally, but one day I'll actually get it published, The Anatomy of Self-Defense. And I agree with what he just said, the pressure points. Problem is that these are the vertebral arteries. That's not, these red things are not the, yeah, they're not. Oh, there's the circle of Willis up there. My goodness. This isn't the carotid arteries. These are the vertebral arteries that are going up the vertebra. The carotid arteries are about there. But bottom line is he asked about pressure points. And so the problem with pressure points is, let me borrow Ashish just for a second because he's such a specimen of health and all that. And look at this guy. So you see his necks, and you could say, well, there's the carotids are back there, and you could call that a pressure point. But I could, for example, come up here right underneath the ears. You feel how that's kind of a pressury area? And that's getting the temporal mandibular, the mandible is the jaw, the temporal mandibular joint. Why does that bother you? And the reason is there's a nerve plexus right there where everything's coming in to innervate that. And so you could talk about that kind of thing. You come back here right behind the ear. You feel that right behind the ear. And the eustachian tubes kind of come in there. There's another set right there. Oh my goodness. Is that, if you feel, so there's a whole set. I just went from here to here to here. And there's three in slightly separate locations. And not to bother poor Ashish. So what I just did is, here's the corner of the jaw, but that's the ear hole. So I came in here on Ashish, right at the corner of the jaw here, but then I went back to the ear hole, and then there is a muscle that attaches right in there, and I just came under that muscle. 1, 2, 3. All three I would call pressure points, but none of them are on the arteries. None of them are attacking the carotid or something like that. So the answer is, there is 3, 1, 2, 3, and I only went that far in the skull. How many more are down here? They're everywhere. So for example, right here is this clavicle. Well, right there, remember a lovely little show called Star Trek? And one day, they were filming this Star Trek episode in the first season, and Spock punches the bad guy and knocks him out. And Leonard Nimoy said, he's a Vulcan, he's logical, he's got to have a better way of doing it. And so what he does is, of course, he does the Vulcan leg pinch right there. And everybody went, ooh, and everybody tried it. Well, it turned out that actually it's an acupuncture place, location that he had learned in acupuncture. And he said, ow, that hurts there, but it's enough that you kind of go, right there. And so there's a nerve plexus right there. Does it knock the person out like a Vulcan? No. But is it acute? Absolutely. And so it's one of the pressure points that he absolutely loves. And so that's just above, the clavicle right in here. There's others, for example, right here, the clavicles come together. You're right at the base of the throat. That's where the windpipe comes down. The windpipe actually descends down, and right there's not much safety as far as the human body is concerned. So there's another pressure point there. So the answer is, I could do an entire lecture just on pressure points around the neck, and that's one of the ones that I actually have in store, I hope, for a later date. But I don't know if we'll get around to it. Did that answer your question way too much?
Yes, sir.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else? All right, let's call it a water break, and thank you very much.